Welcome back, everyone. I'm Massimo Rigotti, and this is the Sober Method podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with Dr. Jess Armine, functional medical practitioner, neuro, endo, immunology expert, former EMT, RN, and chiropractor with over 45 years in healthcare, who reframes addiction not as a willpower or discipline failure, but as a low dopamine biology problem driven by genetics, oxidative stress, and mitochondrial dysfunction from sustained high performance and burnout. We're going to talk about why sobriety often feels flat for high achievers, the hidden biological drivers that no one talks about, and how rebuilding the brain's reward system in the restore phase of sober method creates a lasting clarity, confidence, and performance without the old coping habits. Dr. Jess, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. This is a subject near and dear to my heart, and I really respect what you're doing. This is exactly what's necessary for exactly this audience. So I'm
Fantastic.
very respectful of what you're doing. Seriously.
Excellent. Well, you've spent decades in the healthcare field. And before diving in deep with this functional medicine and epigenetics and methylation and your immunology work, could you walk us back to the moment you realized that the conventional approaches weren't enough for patients who were quietly burning out with their habits and what looked like addiction?
Well, it started when when I became a chiropractor in 1986. It was, and I'm not going to go through all the other stuff I've done, being an RN, being an EMT, jumping out of airplanes. I was heavily into adrenal stuff. Okay, hi, there's a person. Let me jump out. You get your parachute. Damn, I was too excited. And of course, I got married and had children. My middle boy developed schizophrenia. And this intelligent young man, I'm talking about at 10 years of age, he read Dante's Inferno and explained it to me. I was wondering, are you from another planet? Okay, but knowing my Jesse, he is a very special person. And being a dad, I took him right to the psychiatrist, who gave him a bunch of medicines that made him a non-entity. He sit on the couch doing this all day. This is not somebody you wanted to, this is not him. So I basically said, I looked up at the sky and said, this disease is messing with the wrong daddy. So I launched into learning a bunch of stuff, how to balance neurotransmitters. With that corporation that was teaching that, they also developed I'll call it a subspecialty, but it's well known. I'll call it neuro endo immunology, which is the relationship between the nervous system, the endocrine system, and the immune system, and how those three systems talk to one another. I became at the forefront of mitochondrial research. So my my practice shifted from standard chiropractic to basically a diagnostic mode. I was at the beginning of all this stuff and saw how it developed, the epigenetics, how, the pathways, how they influence health. I then met Dr. Kenneth Blum, who is the creator or the person who codified the addiction model, the biological model. He called it Reward Deficiency Syndrome, which has to do, of course, with low dopamine, but more with dysfunction or desensitization, if you will, of the dopamine receptor, particularly D2 receptor. You can see it genetically, what makes it express oxidative stress. I started working with a lot of people with addictions and realized that just this one thing, because my practice is treating complex multifactorial conditions that haven't been helped elsewhere. That's my forte. That's where I shine, because I know both sides of the fence. And when I take a good long history, I usually see where the glitches are, where the stones have blessed on. Well, one more time, Jess. The stones have been unturned, that have been left. We're not seeing things that weren't considered important that really are important. And I've realized that my medical colleagues are not stupid. They're not. They work in an algorithmic sense. And unfortunately, when their algorithms, testing and so forth, come up with there's nothing wrong, or nothing wrong, they basically tell you there's nothing wrong. Keep going from one to another, begin to believe it yourself. So when I applied that to addictions, compulsions, alcoholism, drug use, and so forth, I looked at the history of it and realized that with drugs, especially opiates, it started out with morphine back in World War I. And what do they do to get people off morphine? They give them heroin. Look at the word, heroin. Okay, the hero. So it's like, okay, all right. Went and then they had methadone. They were using opiates to get people off of opiates. And since they didn't truly treat the biology and they didn't treat the craving that are inherent in this, people go from that. Now they have Suboxone, which is really oxycodone, oxycontin, long-term, timed out, timed out opiate with Narcan in there. So if you chew it, okay, you're going to get immediate um, withdrawal, which is not fun. But in this whole thing, I developed a method of thinking about all chronic illness by looking at their genetics, looking at the neuro endo immune paradigm, looking at their mitochondria, and looking at their cell membrane integrity. Putting that together gave me the ability to look at any chronic illness in an individual state, in a different state, a different point of view. In addictions, I very much noticed that they talk about mind, body, spirit, but their version of treating body is let's send you off to the psychiatrist so you get us medicine. It was and what was the major reason for relapse? Jones,
Right.
cravings. Yeah. And it's even worse with people who are of high performance, who are intelligent. It's not your fault you became an alcoholic or a drug addict, but you're not getting the help that you need. So I started working with that and dealt with the biologic portion in conjunction with their psychological professionals or their therapists. It has to be done all together. The problem with Suboxone is that you go to a Suboxone doctor, it's just like a drug dealer. You hand him money through the door, he hands you a prescription. You have to go pay for the prescription. It's the point of view and looking at the body interactively and individually, because everybody's a supreme individual.
So, and I guess what you're saying then, you touched and you talked about the DRD2 allele and how that's tied into the reward deficiency syndrome. You threw it out there really quick, but I don't want to brush over that because I think that there might be a little bit more depth there that you could go into. And when you combine that with the burnout of the mitochondria, how that can really exacerbate this low dopamine state. Could you delve into that a little bit more for us?
Absolutely. Let me talk about reward deficiency syndrome in and of itself. It is the genesis of a lot of obsessions, compulsions, spectrum disorders, and many other things. It's all a matter of how you express depending on your genetic predispositions. But let's talk alcoholism. We've all been to a sports bar. There's a bunch of guys there watching the game, sipping their beers or whatever, and they're talking and having fun. Then there's another set of guys that are knocking it down. It took me a while to realize what was going on. These guys were getting the reward. It goes this whole cascade, and they're getting the reward. So this body is not signaling them to drink more. The guys over here were not getting the reward. Okay, and their body's saying, hey, drink more, drink more. This came together because I love to eat, okay? I know that's not apparent. Okay? And in my chiropractic practice, I had a office manager who was about 99 pounds. So we had lunch every day for over 20 years, okay? And I remember, like, when I was learning this stuff, she would eat like a half a sandwich in front of me, wrap it up and go like this. Leave it there and forget about it. I'd be sitting there saying, what you doing with that sandwich? Okay. So I got the bright idea to ask her. I said, hey, does that taste the same to you? She said, I know it tastes the same. I just don't want it anymore. Hey, I would just keep on eating until I got sick. If I let it go, if I didn't force myself to stop, that was an addiction. Okay. Same thing. I wasn't getting the reward. So my body was saying, eat more. Alcohol was the same thing. Okay. If you will drink. Now that sets off a cascade of events that injures the cells, injures the body, and those stressors make you overuse your neurotransmitters. And depending again on your genetic predispositions, you may start at high dopamine and work your way down seriously, or normal dopamine, work your way down. But the end result of all these things is oxidative stress. So we all know that alcoholics do not eat well. They substitute the alcohol for meals. The alcohol damages the gut. And then you start having a leaky gut syndrome, which creates a lot of inflammation. So it's this big cascade effect. Yes, DRD2 gene may have a polymorphism or allele that makes it more susceptible to becoming desensitized. But remember about genes. Mind you, I've taught these courses all over the place. Okay, I'll give you my YouTube channel when we leave, and anybody can go in there. They're going to find, decoding addiction.
Well, give it to them now. Where can they find this?
It's easy. Just add Dr. DrJessArmine. It's my name. Just put
All
it,
right.
don't put any spaces. And you'll see loads of different videos that you might find interesting. And if you take a little time, they've, by the way, I've done them over 25 years. So some of the stuff is overly, new. It doesn't matter. It's the base stuff. It's basic stuff. So if there is no allele, doesn't mean you're good to go. Okay, it's like an 8-lane highway. So it goes normal, if you will, heterozygous, homozygous. Normal, we just look at green. Think of it as an 8-lane highway. Heterozygous, think about a 4-lane highway. Homozygous, forget the big name, people. Forget the big names. You're not going to be impressed that I can pronounce polysyllabic terms, right? More important, you understand. Seriously. Homozygous, which is the worst one, that's going to have 2 legs. So I submit to you, if there's no traffic, what's the big deal? Okay, if you have a 2-lane highway and it's at night, you just bolt down there.
Right.
But when traffic comes in, the 2-lane highway is going to lock up faster than the 4-lane highway. And do you think you can get enough traffic to block an 8-lane highway? If you're in New York, it's called the Long Island Expressway, the world's longest parking lot. Okay, and we've all seen LA with the traffic.
Yeah, the
So the fact
405.
is that you can have normal, if you will, gene creating an enzyme, but still have enough oxidative stress to make that enzyme not work well. Remember, a gene creates an enzyme. This is more prevalent if there's alcoholism, or I'm just going to use alcoholism as a word, okay? Understand it's a broader term. We're talking about any kind of addiction. So if there's a genetic or a family tendency, you'll find that they tend to have the same polymorphism or allele at the DRT2 gene. Why am I concentrating on that? Because a combination of lower dopamine or lower than normal dopamine plus the allele makes it significant, okay? You have an allele that is blocking it enough, then the oxidative stress is going to make that receptor not as responsive. So it's a combination of 2 things. The point I'm trying to get across is oxidative stress, genetic predisposition, expressing as alcoholism is a simple cascade effect. If we know that, then we can intervene in a manner that at least fixes that portion of it. And I know that most people out there aren't stupid. They're going to attend therapy, but we want that therapy to be successful. Whether it's AA, NA, GA, or any of the other A's that follow a 12-step program, which is fine. By the way, it works. Okay. Because remember, you develop a habit style. So it's said in AA, you come for the drinking, you stay for the thinking. Okay. But if you're still struggling and you have a high stress position and you are feeling horrible about yourself because just a little more discipline and have this under control, you're torturing yourself. You are torturing yourself. Okay. Now you need to, at least sit back and say, sometimes it's looking for colory things, Low dopamine will give you depression, so will low serious hunger. High dopamine will give you paranoia, okay? They're all in a continuum. One of the ways you can tell is that if alcohol relaxed you, but marijuana you didn't like because it made you like this, well, alcohol releases GABA before it becomes acetaldehyde, which is essentially embalming fluid, okay? But marijuana releases GABA, which is your thing that calms your brain down, and dopamine. So if you're already up there, it's going to knock you up into the not necessarily paranoid stage, but that excitation phase. That's why when you smoke too much, you get paranoid, right? Because you're knocking the dopamine way up. Many medications are good. Okay, I'm not anti-medicine, by the way. I think medicine is used injudiciously. And I think that injudicious use of supplements or herbs or anything, that's also bad. It's got to be a meeting of this. It's got to be integration. If you're using a medication, that's working on the receptors at the synapse, okay, which is where the nerve transmission happens. So most of those drugs are reuptake inhibitors or antagonists, which means they preserve the target neurotransmitter, let's say serotonin for an SSRI, they preserve it in the synapse, but they do nothing for the production of it. So at some point, it doesn't matter how much reuptake inhibitor you have. If you, as my mother would say, if you ain't got it, you ain't got it. All right? Simple as that. And I know I'm being jovial, but that's the way I am. Sorry. When I do all this complex stuff, I think of it in cartoons.
Well, yes, it makes
how
it
I
easier to
understand it.
relate. Yeah, because
I
we're
s
dealing with incredibly complex subjects, and so anything that makes it easier to relate to others. But one thing
Absolutely.
that comes to mind immediately is being a high achiever myself, and those that are listening, is that we often hide that internal friction and then blame ourselves for not having the willpower. So how can you help people spot the nervous system and biochemical patterns, the low reward states, in everything that we've been talking about, dopamine pathway backups, the gut brain access disruption, that are quietly driving these cravings but can also lead to burnout cycles? I mean, how do you get that recognition through to someone?
Well, I can what I love to do is look at their genes and take a
Yeah.
history, because if your genes kind of have a tendency to have high dopamine, okay, which is polymorphisms of different enzymes like dopamine beta hydroxylase and stuff. Early in your life, you're going to be an energetic person. You can multitask. You can do many things that led you to where you are. Me, I'm a type B personality. Okay. I'd rather walk with the turtles, not sleep with the fishes, but walk with the turtles. Okay. Hey, what are you talking about? But as time went on, you're going to find that you're unable to do it. A couple of reasons. One, the dopamine is actually injuring your brain because it's too much. Two, dopamine has to break down to norepinephrine, which is what you need for focus, your ability to focus. And once that gets wonky, if you will, you're going to start having stuff like that. What you've done up until this time is compensate very well. When you're young, you can compensate real well. You can drink all night, if you will, and go to work in the morning. Can't do that at 50 or 60 or 70 years of age. And how you rationalized it, which is you're back filling in from emotions. You're back filling in. You're saying, hey, I have discipline. I'm exercising. I'm eating right. Why is this not helping? A lot of it has to do with inflammation, nervous system inflammation, but the willpower begins to feel like failure. And what it really is your neurotransmitter balance is going. Now I teach a course called dynamic neurotransmitter assessment, and I show my students how an initial insult like Lyme disease, something like that, looks on a neurotransmitter test. Everything's up. Then you start, let's say, Lyme disease. Everything's up. Go a year from then, you start moving down. But the epinephrine, norepinephrine, which is your adrenal glands, comes down in a certain way. So I can look at something and say, hey, that's 10 years old. And they will work their way down to the point that the inhibitory neurotransmitters, serotonin, GABA, and the like, are probably way below normal. But the excitatory neurotransmitters like dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine are in the early part of the normal stage, and they'll still be excitable because there's a balance there. You want to control dopamine, you have to raise serotonin. I learned how to
Interesting.
do this by talking to people. I know
Hmm.
what to listen for. And if I have the genetic study, I'll sit there and go, and that's where the predisposition is. So I listen for patterns. I live my life by patterns. And it's a biological problem. If you have that tendency or that line where you go good, 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 good. And remember, things that injure a cell are toxins, as you might expect, microbes, viruses, parasites, so forth, and all the psychological, emotional, and spiritual traumas that we face. They injure the cells in equal measure as toxins and microbes. This was quantified by Robert Naviaux, MD, PhD, who wrote a paper called The Cell Danger Response in 2013. And he identified all these things. And it's been kind of a standard now. The cell danger response, the various phases of it. When that gets chronic, your cells can't work as well. So you're not able to compensate. So when I recognize that and I recognize where it is, I can start intervening specifically. Our guts are terrible. I don't care who you are. Okay. When you have a chronic illness, your gut is terrible. It's usually leaky gut syndrome. If we don't deal with that, leaky gut syndrome causes inflammation and keeps it going big time. The treatment for leaky gut is very benign. So I teach my students, listen, treat it all the time. Why? Did you test for it? Why would I test for something I already know? And I do the risk benefit factor. What I'm going to give them, multivitamins to get liposomal vitamins to get into the cells, something like a KC5 to the mucus layer, butyrate to heal the cells, maybe some zinc carnosine and some probiotics. Am I hurting somebody? No. Then let me ask you a question. If somebody doesn't have leaky gut, assuming, right, and you give them that stuff, are you hurting them? No. If they have leaky gut and you don't treat them because you don't believe that they have leaky gut, are you hurting them? Yeah, because the basis of everything is chronic inflammation.
Yeah,
That's what sets whatever
absolutely.
your predispositions off.
So yeah, wow, there's a lot there.
Sorry.
No, it's fantastic. So let's talk about the work that you're doing with professionals, because you touched on it just briefly there. And obviously we've talked about your works out there for people to view on YouTube at Jess Armine, and also drjessarmine.com. People can find you and set up an appointment with you to see maybe whether or not working with you would be great. So what I'm hearing is that you you're approaching every single case, as it should be, as an individual that is a complex solution, and you're listening to all of the things that come into play, the genetics, the history of the trauma, the stress, whatever it is, because these all come into the makeup. And I came to the same conclusions when I created Sober Method, which originally was just for me, and over time
Wonderful.
has become obviously for the world.
One of the things
Uh,
I'm absolutely impressive with, when you looked at this, I was like, when I first saw it, I said, oh, another guy tells that he can treat alcoholics without them doing this. And then I read into it, I was like, my God, he's really got the right idea.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So I'm curious, for my own deeper understanding, and of course my audience too, is that do you feel like there could be certain like baseline actions that could be taken that would be, for lack of a better way of saying it, biologically showing up every day, right? That just something that I could start small with that would see incremental gains.
Without getting very deep, without doing a lot of testing, or the best way to learn about somebody is to take a good history. My intakes take 90 minutes, okay? Because I have my own practice. I'm a single practitioner. I can take the time. And that's where I find, mind you, people I treat have been here, there, and everywhere. And the one thing I've noticed that hasn't happened is that no one sat down with them and took their entire history, where you see the glitches, where you can see where the insults are. So taking that information, when I'm treating somebody completely, of course, I'm identifying what's wrong. And then it's the order of treatment and what you're treating them with. So I'll give you guys some of my secrets. Okay. Uh, multivitamins minerals are absolutely positively necessary. I don't think anybody's going to argue that we eat mineral and vitamin deficient foods, even if you're eating well, because your body's so bereft of these things. People say, hey, I'm going to bring up my serotonin by eating turkey. Really? Good. I'm going to take you 2 turkeys a day for about a year. Okay. Seriously. I'm not being facetious. Best thing to do is to supplement under guidance. And then when things are good, you maintain it by eating. We've decompensated so far that professional guidance is usually necessary to get you back on track, get your body back to where it can achieve its own homeostasis. So the way to get vitamins and minerals into your cells is with liposomal vitamins, Liposomal. Why? Well, they're packaged like little missiles. They get directly into the mucosa. They get directly into the cells. Most multivitamins you take, even if they're of good quality, they go into your gut. Then they have to be absorbed, which may be an issue. Then they have to be run through the liver twice. Then they have to be released in circulation. And then they have to get into the cells. A lot of choke points there. Okay. So a lot of times you're urinating this bright yellow that you could paint the walls with. Okay. Everybody says, Then they say, oh, no, your vitamins aren't absorbing. That's right. Then they give you a vitamin that doesn't do that. And I really wonder whether it's absorbing or not. Okay. Some of the earlier versions were ionic vitamins and so forth. But liposomal, which used to be quite expensive, by the way, quite expensive. But I know the man who created the best liposomal vitamin on the market, Bill Downs. Unfortunately, he passed. And created something called a proteasome, which was the strongest. He was able to, create, that was liquid. Then he developed a system to create a dry liposome that was just as good. And I checked both these out by live blood cell analysis. So I can easily tell you that this absolutely works. I believe Bill, knowing him, he left the formula, let people have it, and other companies picked it up and developed their own way of doing it. So now you can go on Amazon or anything similar and look up, just type in liposomal multivitamins, and you're going to get several options. Now, you can go for the really expensive stuff. It's not bad either. I think it's a little bit better. But for some people who are not of means, that's like $84 a month. So some people that's a a glitch. So I send them to Amazon, which may be $20 a month. I'm cognizant because I treat a lot of people in lower socioeconomic, middle, and so forth. I treat everybody.
But
I've got no
but they're
morals,
still going to get
no scruples.
they're still going to get a good result, even with the
Oh, absolutely,
perhaps a
absolutely.
little lower quality. It's better than anything they're doing at the moment. Something is
Exactly. If
better
you're
than
not doing
nothing, right?
anything, this gives your biochemical pathways what they need to work. They need all those enzymes need cofactors, which are vitamins and minerals. If you don't have those cofactors, those enzymes will not work at speed the way they're supposed to. Two, let's presume everybody's got leaky gut.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do there? Some good digestive enzymes, because most of us are not digesting our foods completely. And if you try to break down a protein, which is a bunch of amino acids, you have to break it down to the individual amino acids. If you don't, you have a polypeptide bond, which is a big word for a protein fragment, which is an antigen. And they damage the cells, they go through the basement membrane, and the immune system starts working on them, and that creates inflammation. If we digest our foods completely, you take away most of the antigens that your body is using to create inflammation. Look for a multiple. Look for the words amylase, protease, lipase. Some people are all, plant enzyme. Some are created by microorganisms, which is a big thing these days. And some are animal-based, and some have just a big combination. So just look for a combination thing because that's what you really need.
Well,
You want to recreate
fantastic.
the mucus layer.
Mm.
Not that hard to do. I did a study on the fibers that are used to do that. It's usually demulcent herbs. And there's lots of them. Slippery elm, inulin, so forth and so on. The one that is the least reactive is acacia powder, and the easiest to take. It's like a teaspoon or two in water. You mix it up, you don't even taste it. You do that once a day, maybe twice a day, and you're recreating that mucus layer with what traps antigens. Then the body comes over and ties it up like a hog tie. You want the cells to heal. There's two things you can use. Glutamine, which most people use, or butyrate. Now, if you have an anxiety problem, glutamine is not the best idea. I'll tell you why. Because glutamine becomes glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter, even an excitotoxin.
Mm.
It actually is high enough you can see it. And if you're having that kind of problem, you're probably not converting it to GABA, which is the way it's supposed to work. So glutamine is probably not the best of ideas. There are lots of butyrates out there. Tributyrin, which is not any more expensive, is the best way to go there because it actually supplies the fibers that the microbiome can convert to butyrate. People know that we need zinc to hold the tight junctions together. The best form of that is zinc carnosine. Probiotics. If you have SIBO, probiotics is not a good idea, but you may not know. So if you're going to pick out a probiotic, try not to be hogtied by the hype. Look for one that has a balance of lactobacilli and bifidobacteria. Just balance. And that's a good way to start.
Cool.
Sometimes if you
Fantastic.
use probiotics, you may get worse. And that means you have the SIBO. So that's where I would go at first. This is what you can do for yourself. You might see pretty good improvement.
Well, most of those actions I've already taken, but I wanted you to, it always sounds better when it comes from someone other than me. So I appreciate all that feedback. So everyone listening, I have a sober move that I want you to try to take this week, and we're going to try to draw a little bit on everything we just learned from Dr. Jess. So we're going to focus in on the observe, behavior, and execute steps. First, I want you to observe the moment your nervous system or reward circuitry feels hijacked today. I want you to notice the physical sensations first, the flatness, the racing thoughts, the fatigue, or urge to reach for something just to feel normal. And I want you to name what pattern you're recognizing in that. And then in behavior, I want you to try to interrupt that automatic loop with some sort of 30-second pause and ask yourself, what is my brain actually trying to protect or signal right now? And then I want you to consciously choose one small restorative response instead of trying to go into old autopilot habit mode. And finally, in execute, I want you to try to find a new response and execute that 3 times this week. Pay attention to how your energy and your motivation and clarity shift when you begin to give your brain the energy and the input that it's been missing. So, Dr. Jess, we have a tradition on this podcast where each guest answers a question from my last guest. And then after answering, you get an opportunity to leave a question for the next person sitting in your chair. So, Chris Rogers left you this question. Why does this work matter so much to you? Because arguably, it's more than whatever the degrees or certifications you may have.
There's a history of alcoholism in my family. And as I learned how to care for my son, this is something that God put in front of me. And it made sense to me, made big time sense. And knowing that the alcoholic person, the addicted person is beating themselves up in, you know, and that doesn't have to be. You can get rid of the jonesing, which if that's the only thing you can do, fine. Okay. That adds to their ability to stay in recovery. So that's the way I look at it.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. You have a question for the next guest?
Biologically, what is required for stoic thinking? By the way, I'm looking over here because I've taken notes. Okay. I never come on a podcast without preparing because I wouldn't insult anybody by doing it. Stoic thinking is powerful. Why? Observation is critical. Why? Behavior change. Behavior change only works when execution requires what? And restore, well, right now I'll tell you, it's when everything comes together. So each thing that you do, most of it requires energy, most of it requires interpreting signal correctly. But I see somebody else's opinion because this is what really, really, really attracted me to this podcast. This is absolutely correct. And if you're in this stead, realize there's other things that can be done. If you haven't done the stuff that we talked about, consider it. Use some of the easy stuff. If that's not working, it just means you have other things in balance. Doesn't mean you're bad. Doesn't mean you're sick. Doesn't mean that you are of weak stock. Okay, you're just not. All right. It's hard to do that because alcoholics, we hide it, if you will, because society looks down on us. They don't have alcoholics in Japan. No joke. I work with Japanese people.
I worked with Japanese quite a bit myself, and it's very interesting. Yeah,
It is. They consider alcoholism at the bottom strata of society. Yet the rest of it, they all drink heavily, daily. So when I was working with the Japanese practitioners, I said, how about reward deficiency syndrome expressing as alcohol use disorder? Oh, good idea. I wish it wasn't Roundeye telling me. You know what I'm saying? Now it gave them permission to use a clinical name and then get into some of the stuff we talked about in treatment. But to call the CEO of a company an alcoholic, that won't do it.
Yeah, absolutely not. Well, Dr. Jess, you've been absolutely fantastic, and I'm going to give you the floor again. If you have any final words of wisdom you'd like to share with everyone before we wrap up, the floor is yours.
Well, guys, I appreciate your attention and the survivors who've made it this far, because as you can tell, I can talk a mile a minute and I can talk for hours on everything because I'm excited about everything. But I do want you to know that you do not have to suffer. You're not a weak person. You simply decompensated. And if you look at it from that point of view, we just have to get you back to compensating again. Sometimes just filling up buckets, on looking at your physiology and looking at what's overriding it. Nevertheless, love yourself. You deserve it. And realize that there's a way out.
Wow. That was great. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jess. And to everyone listening, I want you to keep fighting for yourself and don't stop just because the pressure hits. I'm Massimo Rigotti. This is the Sober Method Podcast. Please like, subscribe, follow, leave a review, and please share this episode with someone who really needs it. Remember, your future is sober.